Jeremiah had barely stepped onto the porch of the $1 ranch when a woman's voice rose from beneath the floorboards. "Don't take another step unless you're willing to lose this place before the sun goes down." The deed was still folded inside Jeremiah Knox's coat when 3 sharp knocks echoed beneath the old grain shed. The windmill stood broken against the Wyoming sky. The water trough was dry, and someone had cut fresh horse tracks across the abandoned yard during the night. Jeremiah followed the voice instead of turning back, only to find a woman who refused to beg for rescue and seemed to know more about the ranch than the man who had just bought it. Before either of them could trust the other, someone else had already decided neither of them should stay. As you listen, tell me this. Would you have walked away from a place everyone else had already given up on? Jeremiah Knox reached Ash Creek Ranch near sundown on the last cold week of March. The iron gate leaned toward the road, as if one more Wyoming wind might finish it. Fence wire lay curled through the sagebrush. The watering troughs were packed with gray mud, and the windmill stood above the yard with 3 blades missing. On the porch, pale cuts in the posts showed where someone had pried away the old ranch sign. Jeremiah ducked beneath the doorway of the main house. At 6'7", he had learned to enter most rooms carefully. Dust shifted beneath his boots. The stove held cold ash. A row of cracked dishes still sat inside the cupboard. Nothing moved. He had paid $1 for the deed that morning, then signed his name beneath $312 in unpaid taxes. Ash Creek had until winter to produce water again. Otherwise, the county would take it back. Jeremiah stepped behind the house toward the old food storehouse. Crock, he stopped. Crock, crock. The sound came from below the floorboards. He moved 1 boot forward. "Don't step in the middle," a woman called from underneath him. Her voice was weak but steady. "The crossbeam is broken." Jeremiah backed away at once. He found the cellar door buried beneath loose boards and part of a collapsed wall. It would not lift. He could have pulled harder, but the roof above it shifted when he tested the weight. "Can you hear me?" he called. "Yes." "Are you hurt?" "My ankle is pinned. The turnip bin fell against it." Jeremiah brought his bay gelding around from the gate. He looped a rope through the exposed beam, drove 2 fence posts into the ground as braces, then used the horse to draw part of the weight away from the cellar door. The opening was narrow. Jeremiah removed his coat and gun belt, lowered himself onto one shoulder, and worked through sideways. A camping lantern burned near the back wall. Beside it sat a black woman in a dust-covered brown dress, one hand pressed against a rotted wooden bin. Her hair had come loose from its pins, but her eyes were clear. "Don't pull the bin yet," she said. "That board above you is holding the soil." Jeremiah looked up, saw the split support, and nodded. He wedged a short timber beneath it, shifted the bin by inches, then freed her boot. She tried to stand. Her knee folded. He caught her beneath the arms and waited until she nodded before lifting her. Outside, he set her against the storehouse wall. She checked her own ankle, pressed along the bone, then looked at the deed sticking from his shirt pocket. "You bought it?" "This morning. For $1 and $312 in taxes." Her gaze moved toward the broken windmill. "So they found the next man." Jeremiah brought her into the house and settled her in the straight-back chair beside the stove. He heated water in a blackened coffee pot and wrapped her ankle with clean cloth from his bedroll. "What were you looking for down there?" he asked. "Something that proves this ranch never went dry." She said nothing more. When Jeremiah went outside for blankets, he left his rifle across her lap. Rachel Freeman watched him cross the yard, his shoulders nearly filling the doorway. She could have hidden the weapon. She could have aimed it at the door. She did neither. That night, she woke to the sound of hammering. Jeremiah stood on the porch, fastening a second rail below the first so she could steady herself on the steps. "Where are you sleeping?" she asked. He pointed toward the barn. "The house has 2 rooms." "You don't know me." "You don't know me either. That is why I'm sleeping outside." The next morning, Rachel demanded to return to the cellar. Jeremiah set down his hammer and stepped away from the doorway. "You can go down when the roof cannot bury you twice." She stared at him, then gave him directions while he reinforced the supports. The tin box beneath the turnip bin was empty. Someone had reached it before them. In the dirt beside it, Jeremiah found a brass coat button stamped with a single letter. V. Rachel closed her fingers around it. That evening, while Jeremiah repaired a stall door, she limped to the windmill and opened a narrow seam in the wooden shaft with the tip of her knife. From inside, she removed a folded piece of paper, half a survey map. Across the top, in faded ink, were the words Ash Creek Spring. The other half was still somewhere in Sagebrush Hollow. Rachel folded the paper along its old crease and slipped it inside her dress before Jeremiah crossed the yard. He saw the knife in her hand. He saw the narrow opening in the windmill shaft. He did not ask what she had taken. Not yet. By breakfast, rain tapped against the kitchen window in slow, cold drops. Jeremiah poured coffee into 2 chipped cups while Rachel spread the county tax receipt across the table. The figures were written in black ink beside his name. $312. "You have enough money for roof boards or seed," she said. "Not both. The west stall will not survive an April storm. Then we buy boards. And plant nothing? We plant after we have somewhere dry to store it." Jeremiah studied her for a moment, then nodded. Rachel laid the half map on the table. "I will help you bring the water back," she said. "But there are conditions." She wanted access to every deed, receipt, and county notice. He would not sell the ranch without telling her. Every piece of evidence would be copied twice. Jeremiah placed the silver dollar from the sale between them. "No one goes into the hills alone," he said. "And if you know someone is coming after you, you tell me before he reaches the gate." Rachel tapped one finger beside the coin. "What happens when we disagree?" "The person holding the dollar has to listen until the other one is finished." She pulled the coin to the center of the table. "Then neither of us owns it." That became their agreement. The next week found its own rhythm. Jeremiah replaced rotten boards on the barn roof. Rachel sat beneath the open doorway with a ledger across her knees, measuring costs down to the last nail. When she discovered he had sold his best saddle to buy a sack of seed, she said nothing. The following morning, Jeremiah found his old saddle on the fence rail. The cracked skirt had been reinforced with dark leather, and the loose stitching had been pulled tight in small, even rows. He ran his thumb over the repair. Through the kitchen window, Rachel kept her head bent over the accounts. The corners of his mouth moved, but only once. When her ankle could bear weight, she led him along the dry ditch toward Alder Ridge. She stopped often, not from weakness, but to read the ground. There was moss on the north side of certain stones. A willow stump still carried green beneath its bark. The dirt had sunk in a straight line where an old wooden flume had once rested. "Dig there," she said. Jeremiah drove the shovel into hard soil. 2 feet down, the dry earth turned dark. Rachel crouched beside the hole and pressed 2 fingers into the mud. "The water is still running." "Not toward Ash Creek." "No." She looked uphill. Someone gave it another road. They followed the damp line until they found a section of ditch packed with stones that had not weathered like the rest. One rock carried a fresh crescent mark from an iron wagon wheel. Jeremiah lifted it aside. Rachel watched the muscles tighten across his back, then looked away before he turned. Later, she slipped while crossing the bank. Jeremiah caught her wrist. The moment her boots found solid ground, he released her. Rachel looked at the muddy print his hand had left on her sleeve. "You always let go quickly. I do not want you to have to ask twice." She smoothed the cloth and continued up the ditch. This time, she walked close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. They rode into Millstone 2 days later for nails, lamp oil, and fencing wire. Conversation slowed as Jeremiah stepped down from the wagon. He had to lower his head beneath Dorothy Lane's store awning. A little boy stared at him, then hid behind his mother. Jeremiah moved aside so the child could pass. Curtis Vale waited near the grain warehouse in a clean gray coat. "I heard you bought Ash Creek," he said. "I will give you $1,000 and clear the taxes." Jeremiah looked at Rachel. "Did you write that down?" She opened her ledger. Amount, date, time, and the names of 2 witnesses. Curtis's fingers stopped turning the ring on his right hand. He looked at Rachel as if noticing her for the first time. A woman dismissed for losing county records should be careful when speaking about documents. Rachel did not close the ledger. A person who loses a record rarely knows which page was replaced. Curtis's smile remained, but nothing behind it did. Inside the store, Dorothy refused them credit. Rachel offered an exchange instead. She would repair Dorothy's debt books. Jeremiah would mend the leaking roof over the storeroom. In return, they would take nails, oil, and 2 rolls of wire. Dorothy checked Rachel's figures twice before agreeing. On the road home, Jeremiah passed Rachel the reins when they reached the flat country east of Drybone Canyon. She took them without asking why. For the first time, they guided the wagon together. That night, the dining room window shattered. Jeremiah was outside before the glass stopped falling. He found hoofprints leading north, but the rider was already gone. Rachel unwrapped the paper tied around the stone. The message contained one line. "The map did not save you before. It will not save you now." Jeremiah reached for his coat. "We are going to Cobb." Rachel folded the note. "I am not leaving the ranch. He knows where you are, and if I run, he learns that a stone through a window is enough." Jeremiah's palm struck the table. The coffee cup jumped. He pulled his hand back at once. "I am not ordering you away," he said. "I am telling you there is a man outside this house who knows your name." Rachel held his gaze. "And I am telling you, this is the first place where I can prove why." Neither spoke for a long while. At dawn, they found the north fence cut from top wire to bottom. No cattle tracks crossed the opening. The intruder had not made a path into the pasture. He had made a straight path toward the windmill. Jeremiah saddled his horse before breakfast. Rachel found him tightening the cinch beneath a gray morning sky. The cut fence had been repaired, but the fresh wire shone against the older, rusted strands. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Silver Crown." She stepped between him and the stirrup. "You want Curtis to know exactly how much we have?" "I want him to know you are not standing here alone. I have not been alone since you pulled me out of that cellar. You do not have to ruin the case to prove it." Jeremiah's hand stayed on the saddle strap. For a moment, Rachel thought he might lift her aside as easily as he moved fence posts. Instead, he loosened the cinch. He carried the saddle back into the barn without another word. That evening, Rachel placed an old piece of leather on the kitchen table beside the silver dollar. It had once been part of a driving rain. One edge was frayed. The other had been cut nearly through, then rubbed against stone until it looked worn. "My father brought water down from Alder Ridge," she said. "In the summer of 1880, the flow dropped even though the snowpack had been heavy. He followed the ditch uphill and found a new wooden flume turning water toward Vale Land." Jeremiah sat across from her, his coffee untouched. Matthew wrote to the county office. 2 days later, his wagon went over Hawk's Passage. They said the rain snapped. Rachel pushed the leather toward him. It did not snap. Wind moved beneath the eaves. The stove gave a soft iron click as it cooled. Jeremiah looked at the rain for a long time. Then he told her about Granite Cut. The cattle owner had wanted to cross before the first snow. Jeremiah had seen the clouds gathering over the western ridge. He had argued once. When the owner threatened to replace him, he went quiet. The storm struck before midnight. 2 riders were badly hurt. More than 300 cattle were lost in the drifts. I did not bring the weather, Jeremiah said, but I helped lead them into it. Rachel placed the old rain beside the silver dollar. Then do not stay quiet this time. 2 days later, rain came hard off Granite Crown while they worked on the barn roof. A board tore loose from Rachel's hands. Jeremiah caught it against his shoulder, but his left knee buckled when he landed. He tried to rise. Rachel pressed one hand against his shoulder. You do not have to prove you can carry everything. I weigh more than that chair. Then try not to break it. He sat. She cut the wet cloth away from his knee and wrapped it with a clean strip from an old flour sack. Jeremiah held the lantern close, shielding the flame with his broad palm while she tied the knot. Neither looked away quickly enough. The next morning, they rode for Alder Ridge. The trail climbed through loose stone and thin stands of aspen. Jeremiah favored his left leg each time he dismounted, but said nothing. Rachel stopped twice to check bearings that did not need checking, giving him time to rest without naming it. The survey cabin stood beneath a leaning pine, its roof bowed but intact. Inside, they found a dried ink bottle, rusted measuring pins, and a narrow ledger wrapped in oilcloth. Beneath the floorboards lay a county copy of the 1879 water agreement. Rachel brushed dust from the final page. One witness had signed with a careful hand, Henry Vail, Curtis's father. The Vail family had known from the beginning that Ash Creek Spring belonged to the ranch. On the back of the page, Matthew Freeman had written a single note. If anything happens to me, Dorothy Lane holds the second letter. Rachel read it twice. Dorothy told me she knew nothing. Jeremiah folded the document. Then we ask her why. They left before dusk. Halfway down the ridge, Jeremiah heard a horse behind them. No shoes struck the rock. Whoever followed kept to the softer ground between the trees. Each time Jeremiah turned, there was only moving brush. When they reached Ash Creek, the front door stood open. The lock had not been broken. The kitchen jars were untouched. So were the few coins in Rachel's sewing tin, but the rug had been pulled aside. The floorboard beneath it was raised. Every drawer large enough to hide a document had been opened. Jeremiah crossed the yard at a run. Fresh prints circled the windmill. The paper hidden inside the shaft was gone. Rachel entered the house, lifted the hem of her skirt, and opened a line of stitching along the inside seam. From it, she drew a small folded paper bearing the county seal. The piece in the windmill was a copy, she said. This is the part that matters. Jeremiah let out the breath he had been holding. Later, while hanging his wet coat near the stove, Rachel found a folded document in the inner pocket. Philip Keene's signature appeared at the bottom. The first line authorized the sale of Ash Creek Ranch if its taxes went unpaid. Rachel packed before Jeremiah came in from the barn. He stopped when he saw the bag beside her chair. You promised you would not sell behind my back. I am not selling. She handed him the paper. Jeremiah placed it flat on the table. It gives Philip authority to keep the county from seizing the ranch if I am arrested or hurt. Read the final line. Rachel did. Her own name had been added as temporary manager of the land and records. Why did you not tell me? I thought finishing it first would be better. No. You thought deciding for me would be easier. Jeremiah folded the document once. You are right. He did not explain further. He did not ask her to unpack. After a long silence, Rachel set the bag back beneath the chair. Near midnight, metal groaned across the yard. Jeremiah reached the windmill first. Someone had removed the main retaining pin. One strong gust could bring the turning frame down across the wellhead and bury everything beneath it. At the base of the tower lay an unused match and a clear boot track pointing toward Silver Crown. Curtis was no longer searching for the truth. He was preparing to erase the water itself. Sheriff Warren Cobb listened without interrupting. The brass button from the cellar, the threatening note, the boot print beneath the windmill, the damaged retaining pin. Rachel's survey papers. When Jeremiah finished, the sheriff folded his hands across his desk. "I believe someone wants this ranch," he said quietly. "Believing it and proving it are two different things." He tapped each piece of evidence one by one. "A good lawyer can explain away every single one of these." Rachel opened her notebook. "Then we find what cannot be explained." She divided the page into neat columns. Original survey marker, second letter, witnesses, water records. Jeremiah watched her pencil move until the point snapped. Without speaking, he slid a fresh pencil across the desk. She nodded once. Outside, Millstone continued as though nothing had changed. Curtis Vale made certain of that. By the following afternoon, stories had already spread through town. Folks whispered that Jeremiah had threatened honest ranchers. Others claimed Rachel had forged county records after losing her position. Jeremiah heard the rumors while loading lumber beside the grain warehouse. A drover deliberately shoved a flour sack against his shoulder. The bag burst across the street. "You planning to pay for that?" the man asked loudly. Jeremiah bent down and gathered every pound of flour he could salvage. The drover pushed him again. Jeremiah took one step backward. The man struck his chest with both hands. Jeremiah caught his wrist. Nothing more. "I'll let go," Jeremiah said evenly. "You can walk away." The street had gone silent. He released the man's arm first. Only then did the drover reach for a knife. Before steel cleared leather, the blacksmith and Sheriff Cobb stepped between them. People remembered one thing afterward. Not the shove. Not the knife. The giant cowboy had been the first man to let go. That same afternoon, Rachel walked into Dorothy Lane's store alone. Dorothy closed the account book without looking up. "You came for answers." "I came for the letter." The older woman's shoulders sagged. "My husband owed Curtis money. He promised he'd take the store if I handed anything to the county." She disappeared into the back room and returned carrying a cedar box wrapped in faded cloth. Inside lay an unopened envelope bearing Matthew Freeman's handwriting. Rachel broke the brittle seal. The letter listed the exact location of the original survey stone. It named 2 ranch hands paid to divert Ash Creek Spring. It warned that Matthew had found fresh cuts hidden inside his wagon reins days before his death. Dorothy's eyes filled. "I kept the letter safe." Rachel folded it carefully. "Bob, but you couldn't keep my father safe." "No." Rachel slipped the letter inside her satchel. "Tomorrow you'll read this in front of everyone." Before Dorothy could answer, Rachel walked out into the afternoon sunlight. That evening, another message arrived. A ranch hand delivered it without meeting Jeremiah's eyes. Curtis would forgive every tax debt if Rachel left Wyoming before the county hearing. Jeremiah read the paper once, then tore it cleanly in half. Rachel packed her belongings anyway. "If I leave," she said quietly, "he has no reason to keep coming after you." Jeremiah laid the house key, the deed, and the silver dollar on the table. "If you decide to go, I'll hitch the wagon." She stared at him. "You're not stopping me?" "I want you here." He looked through the window toward the dry ditch. "Odd, but if I keep you by fear, I'm no better than the man trying to drive you away." She waited. "If I stay, we might lose everything. And if I leave," Jeremiah answered after a long silence, "I'll still fight him." Rachel removed her traveling coat. Instead of folding it into the bag, she hung it beside the front door. Just after midnight, she woke to a sound unlike wind. Water, not a trickle, a roar. She threw open this door. A muddy torrent was racing down the abandoned ditch from Alder Ridge. "They broke the diversion gate," she shouted. Jeremiah was already pulling on his boots. Rachel pointed toward the lower pasture. "It'll hit the barn first." She ran before he answered. She opened the eastern gate and drove the horses toward higher ground. She woke Tommy Baird, who had stayed the night to help repair fencing, and sent him riding hard for Sheriff Cobb. Jeremiah wrapped a chain around a fallen cottonwood and urged his gelding forward. The log swung across the rushing channel, slowing part of the flood before the current threw him into knee-deep water. Rachel reached the southern spill gate. It had rusted shut years ago. She forced a crowbar beneath the latch. "It won't move!" Jeremiah splashed beside her, braced both hands against the heavy timber, and held it steady while Rachel worked the iron free. The gate finally broke loose. Water exploded through the opening and turned away from the barn. Neither of them could have done it alone. Hoofbeats echoed across the darkness. Curtis Vale rode into the yard with another man behind him. "I came to help," Curtis called. Rachel looked down. Red clay clung to his wagon wheels, the same red clay that covered Alder Ridge. Sheriff Cobb's lantern appeared at the far end of the road. Curtis reached suddenly for Rachel's satchel. Jeremiah stepped between them. He never raised a fist. Curtis drew his revolver. Jeremiah stood perfectly still. "There are too many people watching now," he said. Behind them came Dorothy Lane, the blacksmith, Tommy, two neighboring ranchers, Sheriff Cobb. Curtis's hired hand looked from the sheriff to the broken spill gate. His courage disappeared. "He paid me," the man said. "He paid me to break the dam." Sheriff Cobb took Curtis's revolver. "This time," he said, fastening the handcuffs, "the evidence came looking for me." Morning arrived slowly. Part of the barn roof had collapsed. The western pasture lay beneath thick mud. Jeremiah's shoulder bled through his shirt. Rachel's only travel bag had washed downstream. She cleaned the cut on his shoulder with warm water from the stove. Jeremiah looked toward the damaged barn. "I told you I'd rebuild this place." Rachel tied the clean bandage. "It's still standing." He looked at her. "So are you." She rested her forehead lightly against his uninjured shoulder. Neither of them spoke. Outside, floodwater continued moving across the pasture. Then Tommy shouted from the creek. The original survey stone had surfaced beneath the roots of an old cottonwood. Buried beneath it was a small metal box. Inside rested the county seal, and beneath it lay a forgotten agreement bearing Matthew Freeman's name. Rachel unfolded the final page. Halfway down, her own name appeared in the inheritance clause. The paper was older than anyone standing beside the creek. The county seal had faded to a dull blue, but the signatures remained clear. Matthew Freeman had been promised 1/3 ownership of Ash Creek Ranch after completing the mountain irrigation works. If he died before the transfer was recorded, that share would pass to his only child. Rachel read the paragraph twice. Then she folded the document with steady hands. Jeremiah said nothing. He simply picked up the metal box, wrapped it inside his coat, and looked toward Millstone. "We leave at first light." The hearing was held inside the wooden church because the county land office could not hold everyone who came. Farmers filled the back pews. Ranch hands stood along the walls. Dorothy Lane sat near the front, with Matthew Freeman's second letter resting on her lap. Curtis Vale arrived wearing a pressed gray coat and polished boots. Anyone seeing him for the first time would have mistaken him for the most respectable cattleman in Wyoming territory. Philip Keene laid every document across a long table beneath the church windows. The survey map, the county seal, Matthew's letter, the old expense ledger, the recovered survey stone, the written confession from Curtis's hired hand. Nothing was rushed. Each piece was placed beside the next, until the story no longer depended upon memory. Curtis argued that Rachel had forged papers after losing her county position. He claimed Jeremiah had staged the flood to gain sympathy. Philip answered by calling Dorothy first. Her voice shook as she read Matthew's letter aloud. She stopped only once, wiping her eyes before continuing. When she finished, the church remained silent. Then Tommy Baird stepped forward. He admitted he had seen men from the Vale Ranch move the survey marker years earlier. He had stayed quiet because his father owed Curtis money. His father stood near the back door. He lowered his head, but never told his son to stop speaking. One silence after another began to break. Rachel stood beside the survey map without raising her voice. She placed one ruler across the original ditch and another across the newer diversion. "The water never disappeared," she said. "Someone simply made it flow where it did not belong." No one interrupted her. After nearly 2 hours, the county official removed his spectacles and read the decision. Ash Creek Ranch would regain its legal water rights. The diversion feeding Silver Crown would be dismantled. The accusation against Rachel Freeman would be removed from the county record. Curtis Vale would face charges for falsifying land documents and destroying property. Jeremiah would receive additional time to satisfy the ranch taxes because the damage had been proven deliberate. Curtis did not shout. He looked around the church and realized something had changed. The people who once avoided his eyes were no longer looking away. Outside, the first cold wind of October swept across the street. Philip unfolded the inheritance agreement once more. "Miss Freeman," he said, "you are entitled to 1/3 ownership of Ash Creek Ranch." Rachel looked toward Jeremiah. "You don't have to accept this. I know. You paid for the ranch. I paid $1 for a chance." She searched his face. "You could challenge the agreement." "I could. You could keep all of it." Jeremiah laid the silver dollar on Philip's table. "I bought the chance to save this place. I never bought what already belonged to you." For the first time since they had met beneath the collapsed floor, Rachel did not answer immediately. She simply looked at him. A week later, after the papers had been signed, they walked beside the restored ditch behind the house. Water moved through it in a narrow, steady stream. Not much, enough. Jeremiah stopped beside the rebuilt fence. "I've been meaning to ask you something." Rachel studied the fence posts. "If it's about the north line, you're still 3 steps off." He smiled, almost too small to notice. "It isn't about the fence." She turned. "I want to build this ranch with you," he said. "Not until the taxes are paid. Not until spring. I mean every season after that. As partners. If that's all you'll have." "And what would you choose?" Jeremiah met her eyes. "A wife who stands beside me. One who tells me when I'm wrong. One who stays because she wants to, never because she has to." He offered his hand. Nothing more. Rachel let the silence rest between them. The wind caught the brim of his hat. Then she slipped her hand into his. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we move the north fence together." By early November, the first snow covered Sagebrush Hollow. Half the barn still needed new boards. Only 4 cows and 2 calves grazed the pasture. Jeremiah still owed taxes. Rachel spent long days riding to neighboring ranches, checking water ledgers and survey notes. Life was not easy. It was real. Smoke rose from the chimney every morning. Water flowed through the trough again. 2 coats hung beside the front door. On the kitchen table rested Jeremiah's expense book beside Rachel's freshly drawn survey map. The deed for $1 hung in a simple wooden frame. Rachel looked at it and smiled. $1 didn't buy this ranch. Jeremiah looked toward the windmill turning above the snowy field. What did it buy? She closed the new ledger. Across the cover, written in careful ink, were the words, "Ash Creek Ranch, Jeremiah Knox and Rachel Freeman. It bought us a beginning." Outside, the windmill turned slowly against the pale Wyoming sky. Jeremiah reached to close the door against the cold. Rachel stopped it with gentle fingers, leaving it open just enough for them to hear the water running through Ash Creek once again. Years from then, people in Sagebrush Hollow would probably remember the court hearing, the old survey papers, or the ranch that had once been sold for a single dollar. But those things were never the heart of the story. The heart of the story was a man who finally learned that strength is measured by what you refuse to take from another. It was a woman who refused to let grief decide the rest of her life. Together, they discovered that a home is not built by a deed, a fence, or even a stream of water. It is built every time two people choose trust over fear, honesty over silence, and hope over the easier road of walking away. The West has always been full of hard winters, long roads, and empty horizons. Yet the hardest distance anyone ever crosses is the one between protecting your own heart and letting someone earn a place inside it. Perhaps that's why the sound of water mattered so much at Ash Creek. It wasn't only the land that had begun to live again. Two wounded souls had finally found a place where neither of them had to carry the whole burden alone. If you had been standing where Rachel stood, would you have stayed, or would you have walked away? If this story stayed with you for a little while after it ended, we'd be honored to have you join us again. There are many more stories waiting just beyond the next trail. Stories of quiet courage, unexpected kindness, second chances, and the kind of love that grows one honest choice at a time.